Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome if you're new, and welcome back if you've been hanging around as I talk through some psychology topics that I'm currently learning as a psychology student majoring in psychology and minoring in neuroscience. It's been a bit of a full on week, and while I'd love to talk about some things that are very close to home for me, I think for now, I'm just going to do my best to stay on track, post consistently, and just build my channel, build our community, and just slowly build my platform. And yeah, and hopefully in the future we can have more more conversations rather than just me giving like a little speech for like the next few minutes, which I'm so grateful for you guys being here and actually tuning in along. But yeah, so let's just dig in for now on this week's topic of psychology, which is looking into the world of cognitive development. Now, I know there's a lot of series here on my YouTube channel. I will find a way to organize in the future and also just share more, I guess, more organizational structures. I guess there's a lot to talk about. In psychology, there's always a lot to talk about. And I guess also, I don't know if I ever mentioned this, for those that don't know this, psychology is a science. So it's not just about reading minds and understanding body language and all that. It's actually heavily researched based. So what that means is it's constantly like it's a scientific lab, even kind of. I'm losing my words. This is why I read a script. But like science, like psychology is a science. So a lot of it is like being experimented, being conducted in labs, conducted in like um questionnaires and surveys. So when you hear psychology, it's not always a clinical psychologist that's actually what's happening, but it's also a researcher. So that just does a lot of research. So a lot of statistics and a lot of data, analyzing, all the above. But yeah, just thought I'd let you know because there is a lot to talk about in psychology. Okay, so first, let me ask you a question. What if I told you that children can be nudged into giving the right answer, even for the wrong reason, and that sometimes kids seem like they've understood something, but what they're really doing is just picking up on the little social hints that we're giving them. So they're not fully understanding it. They kind of just picking up on these little cues that we can give them, like not directly, but just based upon like social cues. And yeah, so that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. And it's based off a study from Gilmore and Light and Gilmore back in 1983, which seems like so long ago now. And it's a study that challenged how we think about Piaget's classic conservation task. Piaget is like a classic theorist back in the days. And yeah, and this still sparks a lot of discussion today. So get a coffee, get a mug of hot chocolate, get whatever you want, sit down, let's get comfortable and have this talk. Okay, so let's take the next hour to really unpack what the study means, not just like psychology research, but also for how we understand the way that our children learn and think, which is something we all would love to know. What's happening inside their brains? Like, what are these little humans thinking about all the time? Okay, so before we get into the paper, let's start with Jean Piaget. I hope I'm saying that right. Jean Piaget. It's Piaget. Sure, not Piaget. It's Piaget. Pretty sure. Correct me. Piaget was a Swiss psychologist who spent years observing how children think. He believed that children go through distinct stages of cognitive development, and one of the hallmarks of the stage he called concrete operations. So there's a lot of stages which we won't go through all of them, but one of them was called concrete operations, and this was the ability to understand conservation. So I was going to explain. What is conservation? Conservation is the understanding that certain properties of objects can stay the same, even when their outward experience changes. Sorry, outward appearance changes. So, for example, if you pour water from like a tall glass, like you see this experiment, like you have a tall glass of water and you have a small glass of water, even though the tall glass of water is like the tall the tall glass of water is like slim and long, whereas the shorter glass of water is like short and wide. We're talking about glasses of water. Um, the adults know that if you pour water, the same amount of water in one cup into the other cup, the water amount is still the same, regardless of what the cup looks like. But a younger child will actually often say that the tall glass has more just because it looks bigger. And Piaget did this with liquids, with counters spread on the table, with lumps of clay squashed into different shapes, over and over again. He found that children under around 7 years old, sorry, children around 7 years old, I lost my train of thought. I'm not going to trim this. This is just going to be raw. You're going to see me just like, I'm recording this at 2 a.m. because it's just been a bit of a full-on week, so don't mind me. Okay, so he found that children around 7 years old and under actually failed at these tasks, which is no surprise. And why? It's because Piaget argued that younger kids can't yet mentally, in reverse transformation. So they can focus on one dimension at a time, like the height and the length, instead of considering all factors together. So if there's one glass that looks taller, they think that the glass must have more. And this is really influential for like decades. Like researchers really saw like conservation tasks as a key marker of cognitive development. So this was huge. This was huge. And so far, Piaget studies make it look like children simply don't understand conservation. But here is what researchers started to ask. And they asked a really clever question. So it's good the science doesn't settle. There's pros and cons to that. But they asked a very, very clever question. I'm distracted again. Something in my hair. And what's the question? What's the question? Okay, so the question is, what if the problem isn't with the child, but with the way the task is presented? So in 1975, another researcher ran what's now called a famous variation called my brain hurts. Okay, so in 1975, a new researcher, not Piaget and not the people that wrote this paper, it's a different researcher that's ran a famous variation called the Naughty Teddy Bear Study. Naughty Teddy Bear Study. So instead of an experimenter deliberately moving the counters or changing the materials, a toy teddy bear came along and accidentally messed things up. So this teddy bear messed things up. So imagine this. A child is carefully shown two neat rows of counters that are equal. They agree, yes, both rows are the same. Then suddenly a teddy bear knocks one row and spreads it out. The child just asks again, are they still the same? And here's the twist. Well, the transformation looked accidental. kids were far more likely to give the correct answer. That nothing had changed. However, children as young as 4 or 5 looked like they understood conservation years earlier than Piaget suggested. So, you remember Piaget suggested 7, these were 4 to 5-year-olds. So, what does this mean? Were Piaget's methods undermining and underestimating these kids' abilities, or were the children actually capable of conservation all along? That's the question. Just confused by the way the question was asked for. Okay. Or just confused. Yeah, all along and just confused by the way the question was asked. Okay. Or were they picking up on the idea that if an adult deliberately changes something, it must matter? Okay. So this opened a huge debate in developmental psychology. On one hand, the people are excited, maybe kids are smarter than Piaget thought. But then on the other hand, skeptics were that children weren't showing real logical reasoning at all. Maybe they were just responding to the social cues that's around them. And that brings us to our today's main paper of Light and Gilmore. And the study set out to test. So, Light and Gilmore study, they wanted to know if social context can make children give the right answer. So, what's happening around them? And can it also make them give the wrong ones? Again, the social context triggering the decision. That's what they want to know. Okay. And so they use a clever setup with the toy farm animals and fences. It's pretty cute, pretty common. Each child came in, sat on the floor with their experimenter, and together they built 2 little square fields out of their interlinked plastic fences, one for a horse and one for a cow. Both fields were the same size. Sorry. The experimenter then asked, "Is it fair? Do horses and cows have the same amount of grass to eat?" And the kid said yes. Then came the transformation. In the standard condition, the experimenters simply reshaped one of the fields, turning the 2x2 square into a 3x1 rectangle. Okay, so they just moved it 3x1. Yeah, sorry. I'm like, I can't do math. Like, so, oh no. So it's like instead of making a square, they just move the 2 rows. Oh, 3x1. What's 3x1? I don't know. Rectangle. My brain's hurting. Wouldn't you have to do just what? 4x1? Anyways, then they asked again, is it fair? Do they still have the same amount of grass? In the modified condition, something extra happened. The experimenter brought out a toy farmhouse and tried to place it next to the field, but it didn't fit. He went, oh, and reshaped one of the fields to the rectangle to make the space. Then he asked the same fairness question, which is, do they have the same amount of grass? So the only difference in one case, the transformation seemed fairly arbitrary, but on the other hand, it had a social, meaningful reasoning. The first one didn't have the reason where they said, well, there's not enough space to build the house, and the second one, they're trying to build a house around it. So what happened? And the results were striking. I don't know what that was. The results were striking. In the standard condition, only about 22% of the child to the 2 fields had the same amount of grass. However, in the modified condition, so the one with the reasoning, the number jumped up from 22 to 61, which is almost triple the amount. And that's a huge difference, but here's the catch. The rectangle actually did not have the same area. Area is not conserved when you stretch a square into a rectangle with the same perimeter. The correct answer was actually not the same. They fooled me. I don't even know. Like, what? The rectangle did not have the same area. Area is not conserved when you stretch a square into a rectangle in the same perimeter. I don't get that. So in other words, the farmhouse study nudged children into giving what looked like a conserving answer, but it was the wrong one. Dun dun dun. Dun dun dun. gonna keep going. Um, so even more interesting was that this effect was the strongest in younger children. So the 5-year-olds were much more influenced by the farmhouse context than the 6-year-olds. And when researchers looked at how children explain themselves, most of the justification weren't logical. Some kids said that the rectangle had more because it was longer, while others said the square had more because it was wider. So-called conserves often couldn't explain it all. So what does this tell us? That the children weren't really reasoning about area. They were responding to the social cue in the task. The idea that adults were solving a problem with the farmhouse so the situation must still be fair. So what does this mean? Let's go to what this means. I'm gonna hold it up like this. So what does this mean? Well, don't make up this. Why do more children say that two fields were the same, the farmhouse condition, even though they really weren't? There are a few possibilities. First is distraction. The farmhouse pulled the kids' attention away from the transformation itself. So instead of carefully comparing the shapes, they were caught up in the little storyline. Oh, the house doesn't fit, so let's move the fence. That's one. Second, social influence. Let's think about it. The experimenter basically set up a problem and then solved it. The farmhouse doesn't fit, so I'll just rearrange the field. There we go, now it's fine. Still fair, right? In that moment, many kids weren't reasoning about weren't reasoning. Sorry, my script just typed it funny. In the moment, many kids didn't reason about the grass at all, but they were agreeing with the adult's implied solution. So here's a kicker. In Piaget's original conservation task, when children gave conserving answers in modified context, so many fancy words. It's not not fancy, it's just not everyday words. I'm sorry, I have hay fever, so it's just really kicking in badly. And you can hear my nose is like pretty blocked when I'm speaking as well. But yeah, so some readers thought that this meant that Piaget had underestimated them, that they really did understand conservation earlier. But this paper flipped the script. They showed that kids can give conservation answers when those answers are actually wrong, which means giving the right answer doesn't always mean children can understand the concept. So, what does this mean? Three important points we can take away from the study is that one, children answers don't always reflect pure logical competence. So, I remember our teacher in class gave an example when she said, like, this parent says, and I know they're just doing it to tick me off. That's not really the case. Kids don't have that kind of like logical awareness to do things to tick you off. Not at a certain age. Not under 5. No, they don't have that cognitive awareness yet to do something just to tick you off. Fun fact. But yeah, and two, social context can lead to both correct and incorrect judgments. 3, cognitive development research must always consider the social setting in which thinking happens. And also the bigger message is kids don't think in a vacuum. No, they don't. The reasoning is shaped not by only what they see, but also by how they see the situation is framed, by the intentions they attribute to the adults, and by the stories they give meaning to the task. The next time we marvel at a child giving the right answer, we should pause and think, are they reasoning it out, or are they just reading the room? And maybe that's the point. In real life, thinking and social understanding goes hand in hand. The classroom, the playground, the family dinner tables, these are all contexts where logic, social cues mix together. And that's not a weakness. It's how human development works. So thank you so much, guys, for spending this time with me. I, once again, do look forward to see how this channel grows in the future. And if you do watch it all the way to here, and you can hear how I'm speaking, I really appreciate that you're here until now, and it will get better. It will get better. I'm just really focusing on consistency and showing up right now. This is so grateful that you made it all the way here and low key embarrassed. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night, day, wherever you are. See you guys. Bye.